Welcome to Dear Fans. In a courtroom, a tense exchange unfolded between a defendant and the judge, where personal grievances, constitutional rights, and misunderstandings about public conduct were on full display. The defendant appeared to be on edge, bringing up several topics unrelated to the current legal proceedings, including complaints about housing and alleged victimization. This spiraled into a debate about respect, representation, and the consequences of one's actions, highlighting a larger issue about communication and legal proceedings. The defendant, who is seemingly seeking self-representation, voiced concerns about their treatment in the courtroom. They claim to feel threatened by the legal process, mentioning constitutional rights and civil rights in a somewhat disjointed argument. The judge, however, remained calm, reiterating that the courtroom was not a place for theatrical performances or irrelevant arguments. The focus of the proceedings was clear: public safety, respect, and adhering to bond conditions. The judge addressed the defendant's conduct, urging them to remain respectful to the lawyer and court staff. They emphasized the importance of following court orders, including bond conditions, and treating everyone involved in the process with dignity. When the defendant raised questions about self-representation, the judge responded pragmatically, likening it to attempting surgery on oneself, suggesting that while it was possible, it was not advisable, as legal matters require proper expertise. The judge's response pointed out that the courtroom was not a place for personal vendettas or to assert one's rights in a confrontational manner, but rather a space for resolving legal issues. At this point, the defendant shifted the conversation toward a housing dispute with the Houston Housing Authority. They argued that they had a right to be at the location in question, but the judge pointed out that the housing authority had every right to revoke their housing assistance due to disruptive behavior. The defendant, however, insisted that they had been wronged and mentioned plans to take further action, including filing a hate crime complaint. This diverted the focus of the conversation, but the judge skillfully steered it back to the matter at hand: the defendant's bond violation and their obligation to comply with court orders. Throughout the exchange, the defendant appeared increasingly frustrated. They felt persecuted by Harris County and seemed to believe that their treatment was part of a larger conspiracy against them. In addition to the housing issue, they mentioned multiple grievances, including references to their constitutional rights, potential retaliation, and even claims of attempted murder. These accusations were not addressed directly in the courtroom, but seemed to fuel the defendant's sense of victimhood. The judge continued to reinforce the importance of following the rules and not escalating situations. They used an example from the defendant's past to illustrate the point: when pulled over for a minor traffic infraction, that the defendant could have escalated the situation by arguing with the officer. Instead, they had chosen to admit their mistake and avoid confrontation, which ultimately worked in their favor. The judge suggested that the defendant could benefit from this approach in their current situation. By being respectful and understanding, they might find more success in resolving their issues. Despite the defendant's insistence on their rights and claims of victimization, the judge remained composed and focused on ensuring that public safety and the law were respected. They made it clear that while the defendant may have had a right to be at the housing authority office, their actions had led to the revocation of that right. The judge ordered the defendant to stay away from the premises, emphasizing that any further violation would result in serious consequences. As the conversation continued, the defendant mentioned the looming deadline for their housing assistance, which would be terminated on the 30th of the month. They argued that they had been in contact with someone at the housing authority, Gary Baxter, to resolve the issue, but had not received a response. The judge reminded them that they needed to follow proper procedures and communicate respectfully with the authorities involved. The defendant's emotional appeals, however, did little to sway the judge's firm stance on the matter. In a final attempt to regain control of the situation, the defendant tried to present more evidence, including details about their housing contract and communications with housing officials. However, the judge remained focused on the primary concern: the defendant's violation of bond conditions. They urged the defendant to stay within the boundaries of the law and refrain from further disruptive behavior. At one point, the defendant made an offhand comment about their children, stating that they were a victim of domestic violence, and cited the Violence Against Women Act in connection with their housing issues. The judge, however, refocused the conversation, reminding the defendant that while personal struggles and hardships were acknowledged, they needed to follow the court's directives and treat everyone with respect. The judge's patience was evident as they navigated through the defendant's grievances, always ensuring that the matter at hand was addressed without getting derailed by unrelated issues. The exchange concluded with the judge reiterating their order the defendant must not return to the location they had been trespassed from, and they were advised to communicate properly with the housing authority through appropriate channels. The defendant, still somewhat resistant, acknowledged the ruling, but insisted they would take further action, including reaching out to Washington for assistance. Despite this, the judge's decision remained clear and final. The defendant was to comply with the bond conditions, and any further violations would be met with significant legal consequences. In the end, the judge's approach demonstrated the importance of maintaining order and a quorum in a courtroom. Even when faced with an emotionally charged and argumentative defendant, they steered the conversation back to the core issues at hand: public safety and respect for the law, while offering the defendant the opportunity to resolve their housing issue through proper channels. It was a reminder that in the legal system, while personal rights and grievances are important, they must be balanced with responsibility and respect for the rules that govern society. The defendant's grandiose claims of being wronged while emotionally charged ultimately served to highlight the importance of clear communication, calmness, and respect for the legal process. In the end, it was clear that the judge was committed to ensuring justice was served, and while the defendant may have been frustrated by the outcome, the lesson remained the same: respect for the law and the process is crucial in achieving a fair and just resolution. A recent court case involving Mr. Garcia demonstrated a clear message from the judge about the seriousness of bond violations and the consequences of resorting to violence in situations that could have been handled differently. Mr. Garcia was charged with violating a bond condition stemming from a previous case related to an assault involving family violence. He was also accused of carrying a loaded gun, which was prohibited by the terms of his bond. The new charge put him in a difficult position, as his bond for the original case was in jeopardy, and now he faced the possibility of jail time and a hefty fine. As the case unfolded, the judge emphasized that Mr. Garcia was in violation of his bond conditions, particularly the one that prohibited him from possessing a firearm. This violation, coupled with the newly presented assault charge, could result in a maximum of 1 year in jail and a $4,000 fine. The judge noted that Mr. Garcia's actions appeared to indicate a pattern of escalating behavior, which included not only the bond violation but also a history of assaults and conflicts with others. Mr. Garcia's defense lawyer sought to explain the context of the situation, stating that the defendant had been operating a trucking business and had hired a person with a questionable background, hoping to give them a second chance. However, things went awry when the individual was fired and, in retaliation, began threatening Mr. Garcia. The situation escalated further when the individual allegedly tried to damage some of the trucks, which made Mr. Garcia fearful for his safety and property. He then went to retrieve a firearm that he had hidden in his vehicle. Despite the circumstances, the judge remained unmoved by this explanation. While Mr. Garcia's intention to protect his property might be understandable, the judge made it clear that resorting to a firearm in such a situation was a violation of the conditions he had agreed to. When he was granted bond, the judge remarked that Mr. Garcia's behavior was dangerous, and that this case could easily have escalated to something far worse, as it had done in a similar case earlier that day, where a simple argument led to a murder charge. The judge made it clear that bond conditions are not to be taken lightly. No means no, the judge stated, and Mr. Garcia had crossed that line multiple times. The defendant had a history of family violence-related charges, and even though some of those cases had been dismissed, this did not excuse his recent actions. You don't get it, the judge told Mr. Garcia. We take these bond conditions seriously. In the course of the hearing, it was revealed that Mr. Garcia's bond for the original case had already been revoked. The defendant's lawyer argued that Mr. Garcia had already been punished for violating the bond condition by being hit with a new case and by having to hire a second attorney. He pleaded for a more lenient bond, but the judge was firm in his stance. Given the defendant's history of violence and violation of court orders, the judge was not inclined to let him off lightly. The case took an interesting turn when it was revealed that Mr. Garcia's business was the location where the alleged altercation took place. The defendant's lawyer claimed that the other person had no right to be at the business and that Mr. Garcia had not returned to the premises since the bond condition prohibited him from doing so. However, the judge pointed out that there were better ways to handle the situation, such as calling the police to resolve the conflict without resorting to violence. The judge noted that Mr. Garcia had the right to protect his property, but emphasized that doing so in such a manner was unacceptable. Especially while his case was still open, the conversation shifted to the bond for the new case. Mr. Garcia's attorney asked for a reduced bond of $500, explaining that the family was struggling financially and that Mr. Garcia had not been able to work for the past 2 weeks due to the bond condition. However, the judge was firm in rejecting this request. The bond was set at $20,000, signaling that the court was not willing to be lenient. In this case, the judge made it clear that this was a serious matter and that the defendant needed to understand the consequences of his actions. The judge was not out for vengeance, but the message was clear. Mr. Garcia's actions had put others at risk, and this could not be overlooked. The judge wanted Mr. Garcia to spend a couple of days in jail to reflect on his decisions if he did not understand the severity of his actions. Now the judge would ensure that he felt the full weight of the law. Later, the emphasis was on public safety and the need to protect the community from individuals who do not respect the law or the terms of their bond. As the case drew to a close, Mr. Garcia's defense attorney reiterated that his client was trying to make amends and get his life back on track. He had already hired an attorney for the other case and was trying to comply with the bond conditions. The judge, however, remained unconvinced. While he expressed a willingness to revisit the situation after a few days, he made it clear that any leniency would not come easily. The bottom line was that Mr. Garcia needed to take responsibility for his actions and understand that the court would not tolerate further violations. Ultimately, the judge's decision was a stern reminder that bond conditions are not optional. The law is there to protect the public, and violating those conditions is not something to be taken lightly. Mr. Garcia now faces the possibility of further legal consequences, and the future of his business and personal freedom hangs in the balance. This case highlights the importance of adhering to court orders and the potential dangers of escalating situations with violence instead of finding peaceful resolutions. The judge's approach, though firm, was designed to ensure that Mr. Garcia learns the gravity of his actions and makes better choices in the future. Like this video and subscribe this channel. Thank you.